Yeah, so welcome. It's the top of the hour. My name's Chris Cooley. I'm a local entrepreneur here in Rochester. I've been a proud supporter and really involved in RocGrowth for I don't even know how many years now, Richard, but many more than 5, less than 10, maybe. But it's been an amazing ride to be able to really start to provide a resource or continue to provide a resource for the greater Rochester community. And I, along with the team here behind the scenes, just really proud to be a part of this. And as a lot of you know who participated in our Zooms, and even in the live events that we started doing once again, that there's been an evolution through RocGrowth. And Richard talks about the mission that has evolved over time, where we really started just based on entrepreneurs and startup and deal flow and things like that in the community, and really move toward a real mission driven purpose here, which is equality. And I'll let Richard touch on that. I know he will recite our mission here in a minute, but I'm really excited about these sessions. I always am, and this one in particular, because it sort of blends the things that were RocGrowth and are RocGrowth now with startup community and community access. And so, there's this great story behind the scenes here. I haven't heard it yet. So I love the fact that Richard has, spent all the time that he has establishing relationships with folks like Mike and Adrian to be able to have a dialogue that's really transparent and authentic and genuine. So I'm here to support always, and really happy to be a part of all this. So we are doing in-person events again, and we can make those announcements here. If you have any input or feedback for us, we really want to get a gauge for what you prefer. We live in this hybrid world now, and sometimes it's hard to know if we're getting Zoom fatigue or if we really want to be in person. So we're trying to do as much of both as we possibly can. But please email us and let us know what your preferences might be, and we'll certainly do what we can to accommodate based on the collective input. So without further ado, I'll introduce my good friend Richard to introduce all the panelists and talk maybe a brief bit about RocGrowth.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words, Chris. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Adrian, for agreeing to participate. In preparation for this event, I recalled that it was this time, December, 8 years ago, that we launched and we had our first event. And today, although virtual, unlike that snowy winter day where we met on the corner of Windsor and Main at what was Press Coffee and interviewed Rich Rund, the founder of Cater Tracks, which since then had a successful exit. We are virtual, but we're getting back to the roots where we're featuring what I would call tech entrepreneurs. And part of that larger category, creatives, members of the creative class, which involves other types of innovators, artists, social entrepreneurs. But welcome, everyone. RocGrowth and is about empowering the new Rochester. Everything we do emphasizes that. I have a little bit of vintage, an old Champion sweatshirt I got at Lucky Flea. I was determined not to spend money, but this caught my eye. It has the Champion logo, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Champion, it was a Rochester-based company. It was founded here. So the other thing is we highlight our community's great entrepreneurs and innovators. We have 2 of them present with us today. We like to instigate creative collisions, and that's what we're doing every first Thursday. We've launched this event called First Thursday Creative Collisions in partnership with several other community organizations. That's at Rock Brewing, 5:30 to 7:30. If you're on our list, you'll receive notifications, but you could just assume it will continue through indefinitely, and please show up. It's unstructured and very pleasant. And everything we do is informed by promoting greater equality of race, class, gender, and age. So we do want your feedback. There are certain benefits and efficiencies to providing this in a virtual format, but we all know humans are social creatures, and there is no substitute for interacting. Thus the First Thursday event, but if you have ideas and you prefer or some input about how we may reintroduce the event in person, please give us your feedback. If you prefer this format, let us know. We're going to record it. It's easy for us to post and online within 24 hours. And we also use we produce it in podcast format on all the major platforms. So let's spotlight Mike Colyer, please. Thanks. So Mike, I met you perhaps a dozen years ago when you were an emerging executive in a private equity-backed company. You were running Ward Science, right? Here in Rochester?
Yeah, Ward's Natural Science, yeah. Part of the VWR group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a
Great
company
business.
that actually is a historical relic in Rochester, right?
Yes. Yeah. One of my proud moments was helping get Henry Ward, who founded Ward's Natural Science 150 years ago, inducted into the Rochester Hall of Fame. He was an entrepreneur that kind of went, I think, unnoticed, and had a huge impact on education in North America. So it was,
and I believe
a cool place.
I believe his mansion still exists right there in the Grove Place neighborhood. So
Interesting.
Windsor and Selden, the Seldens and the Wards. But anyway, why don't you tell us who you are? I like to open up with people's origin stories.
Yeah, well, Richard, thank you for the invite. I think it's great what you guys are doing. Even I remember, 12 years ago, you'd have some dinners that I was able to attend a few times, and it was great to connect with just different people throughout Rochester. So the 30 seconds on my background, born and raised here in Victor, New York, actually. Graduated Victor in 1991. So I'm kind of dating myself. That was when Victor was still a small farming community that really nobody ever went out to, right? Eastview Mall still had the green carpet, I think, at that point in time. I went to school at the University of Buffalo, got an engineering degree and an MBA there. And then my first job was with GE in Erie, Pennsylvania, on their leadership program. So I kind of figured I was going to just slowly make my way around the Great Lakes. Like Cleveland was the next stop. I just keep going. And then spent many years at GE, and then got into essentially being a hired gun in the private equity world to go in and fix companies. And I did that for a long time. And in 2017, so a little over 5.5 years ago, I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and started learning about this industry and the space. And it reminded me of the start of the internet. And I was in college when Mosaic and Netscape came out. The internet was really launched. And, I was at that point in time, if you wanted to bet on the internet, you pretty much had to move to Silicon Valley, California. And I didn't have the guts to do it at the time. So I took a more traditional, safe route, went to work at GE, which was, the big industrial company. But I always thought man, I wonder what would have happened if I would have went to the West Coast. So I missed the big .com bubble, growth. But when I started reading about blockchain technology, it reminded me of the start of the internet. And I was like, wow, this technology fixes a lot of problems that can't be fixed any other way. And this doesn't happen very often in a lifetime. And I thought, what the heck, let's go for it. And had a long conversation with my wife, who was incredibly supportive. And I said, I'm going to basically take the 20 years of experience and put it on the shelf. And I'm going to go start over at the bottom and learn an entirely new industry and space. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I want to go all in. I'm not going to do it half-assed. I'm not going to do it as a part-time job. And I gave myself a 5-year window. And said, look, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to stick with it for at least 5 years, because I think it's going to take a while to have this thing play out. And it has been just a wild ride over the last 5.5 years. So I've shared this story with my team here at Foundry, and I've told them I'm committed for the next 5 years, right? Like I hit the 5-year mark, and I'm like, we're not done. There's still too much work to be done. I'm in for another 5. Let's go see what we can do here. So yeah, that's kind of the origin story, I guess, Richard, in terms of like how I started into crypto. I don't know. You want to talk like the origins of Foundry?
We could get really in the weeds quickly because of doing my work around this, or I want to be respectful. We have a diverse audience. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I often find happens when I get people who are real evangelists for Bitcoin, and many of whom are associated with Foundry, it can get very technical. And so I'm trying to get for the layperson for a moment, and let's remove ourselves from the headlines of Sam Bankman-Fried and all that news story. Why should people in our community, or the people who are attending this call, consider it such a technologically disruptive, important technology?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's probably the hardest question to answer, is like, oh, can you just simplify Bitcoin? And so at the end of 2008, the Bitcoin white paper was released to the world by somebody. We don't know who it was. They had a pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know if it was a male, a female, a group of people. We don't know. And they released a new technology, which we now call blockchain technology, which basically allows you to create trust between two people without a middleman. And that's the kind of the simplest way to think about it, right? So today, when if you transfer value between two people, you need somebody in the middle to verify both entities on both sides of the transaction, that whatever you're passing is of value. Like there's somebody in the middle, whether it's the banks or lawyers, or there's lots of businesses that are built around being that of the truth. And blockchain technology basically eliminates the middleman and allows people to transfer value electronically. You can do that in a lot of different ways, and that's what is kind of being explored and experimented with and being set up. So I'm trying to figure out how to go not too technical, right? So with Bitcoin, Bitcoin was the first application of this technology, and there's been lots of attempts to do other things, right? So to transfer value electronically, you have to know that nobody can, replicate it. It's got to be fungible. You got to know its origin, and that's what this white paper laid out the technology to make happen. So I'm trying to come up with a right.
In this white paper, I'm just going to. In this white paper, was there any notion that it would potentially become a speculative opportunity? Because we just lived through a period where, I want to touch.
It's interesting. What's being built right now, and what we're focused on at Foundry, is building out the infrastructure that supports the ability to run these networks, right? So the machines we have, and our customers that we work with are running these machines that run the algorithm on the network, and it basically provides the security of the network. and we're building that infrastructure out. So the recent analogy would be, you know, when the internet first came out in the early 90s, you really had, someone had to start wiring up the country to transmit data, right? So you had all kinds of people out there laying cables, putting up ISPs. There's all kinds of rooms being set up, buildings for switchgear. You know, Cisco was a big player in building out the tech that allowed the internet to be connected. And we spent decades building that out. And that industry went through boom bust cycles and went through consolidation cycles. And now there's just kind of a few players left that dominate that space, right? That's exactly what's happening right now with the Bitcoin network. And when you hear Bitcoin mining, that's what we're doing, is building out that infrastructure that secures the Bitcoin network and allows us to transfer Bitcoin and secure the network between individuals, right? And that's what the Foundry business is focused on, right? We are providing services to the folks that are building out that network, as well as participating in it ourselves. And it's not going away. Bitcoin is something that can never be shut down, can't be controlled. Nobody's in charge of it. Everybody self-selects into the system. And we're participating in the build out of this network. So there's things that, like, to bring it into the real world, I've always thought, like, I understood like traditional businesses, manufacturing, distribution. That's kind of the world I came out of. Besides Bitcoin, like, if you start going through the mental exercise of why is your house title or your car title a piece of paper in your drawer today, right? And it's because if you make an electronic copy of it, you can't prove that you're the only one with that electronic copy of the car title, right? Or you can't prove that it wasn't altered somehow. And that had been the case up until blockchain technology, until the Bitcoin white paper. And at some point, there are people now working on a blockchain that you could put a house title on it, that we would all agree that that electronic copy is the actual car title for that vehicle and that you own it. And if I sold you the car, Richard, I could literally transfer on my phone that car title to you, and everybody would recognize that you now own that car because you have that title, right? That's what's coming. And we're gonna get into digital identity, right? Like, why do I have to carry around a license today? Right? I don't want this piece of paper anymore, or this wallet anymore. I want to be able to have my identity on my phone. If I show you this, everyone agrees that that's my authentic identity. And it's impossible to replicate that, right? That's what blockchain technology enables. We're still years away from it hitting mainstream, but we're building out all the infrastructure to make that happen. And it's going to take a long time. Like, it's kind of like, I remember being that 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid when the internet came out and wanting to watch a movie on my flip phone, which didn't even exist at that point in time. But like, you knew that it was possible, but it was going to take another 15, 20 years for the technology to actually get to the point where I can walk around with my smartphone and I can watch movies, I can watch live programming, listen to music. Like, it's amazing what has happened. A lot of that has happened in the last 10 years, but it took the prior 15 years to build out all the infrastructure to get to the point to make this a reality. And that's what we're focused on.
And then once it's done, you walk around as though it's always been.
You walk around as if it was always there,
yeah,
right?
We used to have these concerns about data storage, right? You know, and how we were going to achieve some capacity limitation, and now data, you know, we don't even think twice.
So on the Foundry side, I think it would be, from a Rochester perspective, I think what's interesting and the story that's not don't think it's well told, and we don't spend a lot of time broadcasting it, to be honest with you, because we're kind of heads down building. But when I got started in the space, I started building out kind of a smaller mining operations and got connected to some other folks in the industry that were building out larger scale. And I went and joined them and helped them. That was through the YPO network, so the Young Presidents Organization, which we have a really strong chapter here in Western New York of YPO. And I started reaching out to YPOers around the country of who else was in the mining space, and got connected with some of them. And then 3 years ago, got a phone call from a gentleman named Barry Silbert, who is the founder of the Digital Currency Group. And DCG is probably the biggest player in the industry. They own Grayscale, CoinDesk, Genesis, Luno, and he's invested in about 250 blockchain startup companies. And he said, hey, I want to get into the mining space and the infrastructure space. Want you to lead it. And I said, well, I don't want to move to New York City. And he said, good, I don't want to build any more business in New York City, build it in Rochester. So it was music to my ears, because I'd spent a lot of my career traveling, and the idea that we could build something special here in Rochester was just amazing, right? And we've scaled in the last 3 years. We've gone from me to about 170 employees. About 70% are in the Western New York area, so Rochester, Buffalo. We now have a Buffalo office, and we've basically been able to either get people to relocate to Rochester to work for us and pursue kind of their dream of working in this industry, and or we've been able to hire people. We call them like the closet crypto people, that are super talented folks that are working at companies that moonlight in the crypto industry, or like their hobby is nights and weekends studying crypto and Bitcoin and learning about it. And the opportunity to do it full time is like such a gift for them. So we've had a lot of success building out a really strong team here in Rochester, as well as tapping into the university talent, right? RIT, University of Buffalo, Cornell, some really strong technical schools. And these kids are just super passionate about this space. So instead of having to move someplace else, they can actually stay here and do what they love. So it's like we're doing all the things. Like what's kind of funny to me is like we're doing all of the things that everybody talks about wanting to do in Rochester. We're doing it with no economic support from the state or local agencies. And yet I have to hire, I've got full-time public policy people trying to educate our lawmakers, because New York State's trying to kick our industry out. And it's like, wow, I'm doing everything you want us to do, and yet now the state is actually working against us, and it's been.
Well, this reminds me of any disruptive industry. You're challenging vested interests. So when you talk about titles, changing titles for a home, there are a lot of people that are benefit from the way it works right now. Uber and Airbnb were disruptors, and they faced a lot of legal consequences and hired their cadre of lobbyists and lawyers to advocate in municipalities and states. So, I mean, I know there is an inquiry about New York State, and we had an interesting conversation about it, how it's politicized the data mining business, and how you have a very different read on how New York can play in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And the misinformation that's out there in the mainstream media is shocking to me. This being in the crypto space has really opened my eye up in a huge way to how much is misreported, and some of it's on purpose, and the agendas that the media pushes. It's really fascinating. So we've got a very long-term focus at Foundry, right? We think in terms of decades. We really don't care what happens month to month, quarter to quarter. We're really building out something that is going to be truly special years from now. and try not to get distracted by all of the ridiculousness that you read about in the mainstream media. Now, if you're on the outside looking into this industry, you're kind of like, what is going on with the space, right? So there's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of nefarious characters. And every cycle we go through, we kind of work them out of the system, and the whole system gets stronger and better for the kind of the next cycle. So it's been fascinating. It's been fun. I love it. I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I have like a 6-minute commute to work, which is the most amazing thing in the world. And we've got a great team at Foundry. So,
and I must highlight your ability to recruit some remarkable talent, Doug Krasinski, and obviously Dan Magnashevsky, who is a co-founder of Buffalo's first unicorn, who's now your CTO. And I've seen many of the young, talented people from, I met an individual graduated at NYU, you know, who super psyched to work with you. I mean, it's a sign of a good manager, well trained at GE, which is a wonderful training ground for years, right?
We got a great team. We've got a great team. And I look at it, I think we got Adrian on, and I would love for Adrian.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going to segue. I was getting into the team.
Yeah.
Because, anyone who dwells in the world of entrepreneurship, startups, understands that the role of culture. I mean, it's a mantra these days, but work on the culture, building, you know, in order to recruit the talent you need, you have to have an organization with the proper culture. So I know you emphasize culture, and there is an alignment that you would associate with Bitcoin. So why don't you tee up Adrian in the initiatives and your approach to culture and why you connect it with the type of business you're in?
Yeah, so we started a program we call Rock the Block. And there was one of these moments where, you know, part of the reason I got into Bitcoin was this idea that it's going to redistribute wealth. It takes the power away from the current people that control our money system, control the world. And I don't think they always have the best interest of everyone in mind. They pretty much have their own interest in mind. And Bitcoin essentially removes that power from them and redistributes it to everybody in the world that wants to participate, right? So Bitcoin is a self-selection process. You have to self-select in. I always tell people there's 21 million Bitcoin available. That's it. There will never be more. There's like 28 million millionaires in the world, which means not every millionaire today will own one full Bitcoin. So I feel like if you have one, that's probably long-term a good spot to be. And when we looked at like who we were serving, right, there's a lot of discussion around what Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies can do for third world nations and help those folks that are in tough situations and kind of give them freedom. And I was like, well, we're sitting here in Rochester, and you know, there are parts of downtown Rochester that are pretty much a third world country, at poor education, extreme poverty, not very many opportunities for
life
folks.
expectancy, health, home ownership. Yeah, you can
Like
go
it's
on.
just
Yeah.
it's everything.
It's everything. Yeah.
And we said, well, why can't we do something right here in our local community? Like, we don't need to go to some South American country or to Africa and help somebody there. We should be helping somebody right here in our own community. And the story was like, we said, hey, we want to make a commitment to hire students from the Rochester City School District into our business and teach them this industry and help them break the cycle of poverty. And as the story goes, I reached out to Bob Duffy. I said, hey, Bob, here's what I want to go do. I need somebody to lead this program. And Bob said, I've got the perfect person. It's Adrian. And I'm like, yeah, but doesn't Adrian work for you? And he says, yes, but this sounds like a great opportunity for Adrian, and it would be a good for him. And I'm like, Bob, you know, if I have lunch with Adrian, he's coming to work for me. And he's like, I know. And I think it's going to be good for Adrian. So we brought Adrian on to lead the program. And Adrian, I'd love for you to tell everyone more about what we're trying to do and all the ups and downs and the challenges.
Adrian is a bit of a celebrity. So a lot of people in the community will know him, but just in case, Adrian is a relatively young man. You've lived a full life already. So keep it short, all right?
Oh man, first off, thank you so much, Mike, for that generous intro. Fun fact, I just had my 1-year anniversary at Foundry yesterday. So it was a year ago that I officially joined the team and started the work that Mike was just talking about. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Adrian Hale. Before my role at Foundry, I was Senior Manager of Workforce Development, Economic Development, and Education Initiatives at the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. And to be frank with you, I came home because I grew up in the exact part of Rochester Mike is talking about. So that third world country, if you will, the 14621 area code. I grew up on streets like Conkey, Avenue D, First Street. And after high school, which I got through thanks to sports and extracurriculars, I joined the Marine Corps after I watched a documentary that showed the war in Iraq called Fahrenheit 9/11. So I did 5 years in the Marine Corps, went to Afghanistan twice, started reading a lot of different books, and started to shape my thinking of the world and how to have an impact, because my role in Afghan was to try to deter young Afghanis from wanting to either support the Taliban or join Al-Qaeda. And for me, I'm trying to think, how do we keep kids off the streets, out of gangs, in school? So I got out of the Marine Corps. I dealt with the turbulence of reintegrating into civilian life. But I started school at MCC. I got involved in the community from there. I got into Yale. I met Bob transferring from MCC to Yale. And I worked at the Chamber of Commerce for 5 years. And I got to see the inner workings of our community and everything that gets done and that doesn't get done. So by the time Mike came knocking, talking about blockchain and Bitcoin, initially I was skeptical, because working in a civic institution, I was very much so civically minded, thinking that there's a process to solving challenges and problems, and how does this new industry, these new technologies, how is it going to do that? But once we got to know each other and I met his team and got to understand more about the technology, I was excited to now make that move over to Foundry and build a program that, in my opinion, he had the willingness to build a kind of program that I think should be the way Rochester practices workforce development across the board. And so he talked about Rock the Block, but in particular, the flagship program within Rock the Block right now is called the Mining Engineer Fellowship. And what it is a 2-year on-the-job training apprenticeship that takes recently graduated RCSD grads under 23, over 18, and it starts to upskill them into what it takes to be what we call a mining engineer, which is somewhat of a practitioner of different warehousing equipment and electrical skills. And there's so much that goes along with what it takes to really run a mining operation like Mike was talking about. And so we launched our program with our first cohort back in May. I stole some top tier talent from the Center for Youth, a man named Eli Kai, who's actually listening in on this conversation with me right now. And we hit the ground running this spring. And now we're closing the year out, thinking ahead about how we're going to expand and grow that out. But we've also had the pleasure of starting a new business service that directly receives its workers or parts of its team from the Mining Engineer Fellowship, called Foundry Deploy. And so far, we've got to add some customers into our loop and have rave reviews from all of those customers about the services that we're providing. And as we grow that business, I will just continue to scale our efforts within the Mining Engineer Fellowship and Rock the Block.
Wow, this gets an entrepreneur, or, really excited hearing about someone who identifies a problem and tries to solve it, rather than writing a big check to a charitable organization or showing up at an event and hearing all the people who aren't necessarily job creators,
right,
talk about workforce development. So
And just without over talking you, Richard, it's important to know like what we put into this fellowship, right? So everything from literacy and numeracy remediation to financial literacy, to learning how to use a Microsoft Office suite and, you know, laptops, technology. I mean, you name it. I mean, they're making $60,000 a year, so they're gainfully employed from the first day. They have access to full benefits, and they undergo various different types of training, certifications. So this is a kind of workforce development practice where we say, how do we remove the barriers? How do we upskill folks and make sure they're capable of fulfilling the responsibilities and duties of the role that they have? And now we're kind of shifting more so into this more holistic approach, because we've seen, to the point of, you know, this third world country, poverty, trauma. I remember when we first started them, we had an ACE evaluation, which is adverse childhood experiences, where the highest score you can get on an ACE eval is a 10. All of our fellows are over an 8. So we know that there's trauma. We know that there's consequences, both collateral and, you know, direct, from living in poverty. And so now we're trying to deal with that piece, right? Because it's one thing to take somebody out of poverty by giving them resources and skill sets. It's something totally different with trying to help them adopt a mindset and attitude of success and help remediate the behaviors and actions that they take to lead their lives as well. And so that's kind of where we're pushing now.
Yeah, and Richard, for me, it was a real eye-opening experience, because it was like, oh, Adrian, we're going to do whatever we need to support this cohort, right? And so the first thing was, hey, they don't have cars. And I'm like, okay, they don't have any cars. So we're out here in Bushnell Basin. And he's like, yeah, by the way, they don't have driver's licenses either. And I'm like, I can't believe they don't have driver's licenses, right? And I'm like, we'll just pay for Ubers for them to come out. Like, we'll pick up the cost. We'll pay for an Uber to come pick them up, bring them in every day. And I'll never forget the first day, 2 of them show up 20 minutes late, right? Now, here's a program that is set up to change their entire life. This is like such a unique opportunity. And in my mind, I'm like, I cannot believe 2 of them are showing up late. I mean, we literally paid for the Uber to go pick them up and bring them to work. And Adrian comes in, he's like, look at Mike. 2 of them are going to be coming in here in a few minutes. They're late. But you got to understand that Uber refused to pick them up in their neighborhood. And it was just one of those moments of like, okay, this is going to be very different than anything I've ever done before. Like, I never thought about the idea that Uber literally wouldn't go into their neighborhood to pick them up. And it was like, wow, like what these kids, I call them kids because they're the same age as my kids, like what these kids are up against to try to make it is just overwhelming. Yeah. So we've been the last 6 months trying to break down all of those barriers. And it's amazing to see the progress that has been made in terms of their maturity and where they've come from and where they're at today. It's spectacular. Still a long ways to go. Like, this is a multi-year program, right? This isn't something like, okay, we're done. There's still a lot of work to be done. And it's amazing what Adrian and Eli have been able to do to really provide the support to these individuals. And they're great. I mean, they're all stars. It's unreal.
We once interviewed Mike Mandina and Rick Plimpton at Optimation, and I know Jen Sertle is on the call, and she's been very helpful contributed to building their culture. And they have an appreciation that every new hire is going to have an impact upon their culture. And I suspect having these individuals, I know the cohort is 4 at the moment, Adrian. Yeah, I bet those 4 people perhaps have some impact within the organization as well.
So I think you see it kind of like what Mike just said, right? So even though we're teaching them, right, they're teaching us every day. They're teaching me every day. Like, even though I've grown up in their situations and circumstances, I'm 33 now, the world has changed, right? Our oldest fellow is 23. So there's a 10-year difference between me and them, and Eli is about 28. So they're constantly teaching us what it's like to deal with the issues that they have now. Like, even when we were growing up, I don't think the gun violence was this bad when I was younger. Like this summer, I kid you all not, like this entire summer, every time you heard about a young person being shot and killed, it directly impacted one of the fellows in our program. And I mean, so imagine trying to transform your life, trying to take advantage of an amazing opportunity and still dealing with grief, still dealing with loss, still dealing with hardship, and trying to, I think, negotiate within yourself a sense of deservingness when you are in the presence of people who might make you feel, if not directly, guilty, because your life is changing and transforming, but a lot of people that you know are still in the same situations and circumstances. And so for our fellows, we've been trying to really provide that social emotional support, which is like our new direction, because we understand that there's so much more to taking someone out of poverty than just money or resources. And to Mike's point, like I kid you not, we Ubered and lifted them every single day. We paid for all of them to take driver's education. They all got their licenses, and then they all got cars from transportation grants that they also received from being mining engineer fellows. So it's not just, it's not just that, right? But it's also about giving someone the ability to be determinate in how they live their life, how they lead their lives, and to help them make positive decisions for themselves.
And you know what's the other thing that is very real, and it's tough to even say out loud, is, and look at these 7 were basically kind of randomly selected from the city, but they essentially are coming in with a 4th grade education. Now they all have New York State Regents diplomas.
Yeah.
They all graduated from the Rochester City School District, but I can tell you they have a 4th grade education. Now, they are capable of a college education, but what they have with them, what they walked in with them, is basically a 4th grade education. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about, like, how do you go through the world with a 4th grade education and be successful?
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. It's a horrible disservice that's happening right now in the city school district. And fixing that is a monumental task.
Herculean.
Like we're like focused on these 4 individuals right now, and they've got a ton of potential, and there's a lot of work that has to be put in, and we're giving them the time and space to kind of build up those skills.
Mm-hmm.
But that's very real for our city. That is a very real problem.
Yep.
That's if we don't figure out how to tackle that in a real way, it's just gonna steamroll us for generations, right? Like it's hard to recover from that. And unfortunately, I think we are now a couple generations in, right? We're a couple generations in of poor education, and it's
well, I am really glad that we were able to give you this forum, because this perhaps will represent a step in the right direction, which is also attacking the mythology around these problems that might exist in the suburbs, and about the school district, and about why things exist as they are. There is a whole narrative that helps perpetuate this system. But you're doing hand-to-hand combat and having an impact on future leaders. So I commend you. And talking about a leader, not a future leader, I'd like to just put this on pause for a moment and highlight the work that another leader in the community has been doing. And that would be Jackie Sprague, a dear friend, and she has something to share with the audience. So if, Tom, you can find Jackie, that would be great.
Oh, absolutely. This is so exciting. I am very interested in connecting with you beyond this forum, because I work with individuals in the community developing what is called change agents. And I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm only going to take a couple of minutes. First of all, I'm a long-term family member of Rochester since the 1830s. Family members were abolitionists and suffragists, helped develop the Underground Railroad to the extent of prosperity. There is a wonderful event that we are having that I have to let you know about because I'm initiating something that is called the Black American Historical Perspective, and it's going to be lectures. So we have a lecture tomorrow that's Saturday, a lecture that's going to be about not only Harriet Tubman, because I was the leader along with Susan Taylor Brown to implement the Harriet Tubman celebration here in Rochester. We worked with many youth and gave 100 certificates to children who participated in one way or another to learn and to recognize the history of Harriet Tubman as a foundation, Adrian, around that self-esteem, the knowledge of their forefathers, and how that has transcended to our current time. So it's very important that we develop them with change agent skills. So when I think about the people in your program, Mike, and Adrian's program, I'm going to be connecting with you. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for them to be speakers and encouragers when I'm working with other youth. We need them to see the wonderful examples that you're working with and the heart and soul that these people, the young people that have the same circumstances as they have, and how they're overcoming those particular issues. So on our event on Saturday, the important thing about this event is you probably have heard about the one and only Minister Franklin Florence. Based on Franklin Florence's contributions to this community around the civil rights movement in the 60s, the people he galvanized together to make this history change, employment opportunities throughout all forms of government and industry, and working with a collaboration of people to make this happen, it changed the whole economic situation. So in other words, Adrian's family was impacted by it because before that, there were not the jobs available in Kodak and Xerox in the major corporations. And there were generations of individuals who went on, like Adrian, to go to college, to be able to contribute and come back to our community. So we are honoring him. And we are also continuing the bicentennial celebration for the one and only Harriet Tubman because of her civil rights movement way before any other civil rights leader. And so we are honoring both of them at the Central Church of Christ this Saturday. It's 101 South Plymouth Avenue from 12 to 2 p.m. And we will have a small exhibit that even shows Ephraim Gabri's mural on the East High School building, and also historical information from the Howard Coles collection at the Rochester Museum and Science Center, the About Time magazine collection, and the historical information that was recorded around the Harriet Tubman bicentennial celebration here in Rochester. So we're going to have panelists that will be available. We will have the wonderful one and only Dr. Walter Cooper. We will have the son, Minister Clifford Florence. We'll also have Nancy Crossed, who is a wonderful activist within our community, and I will be one of the panelists. We ask you to consider coming, to ask your cohorts to come. We think this is a wonderful opportunity for sharing our history to build some of that stamina we need in the community on who we are and where we came from and where we can go.
Thank you, Jackie. Would you be kind enough to put a link to the event in the chat? There was a request.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So
thank you.
We have a remarkable history, not unblemished, and assets that provide an opportunity for us to create this new Rochester. So let's return to the conversation.
Having Franklin Florence and Dr. Cooper together. I mean, we're talking about giants. So thank you for sharing that, Jackie.
Oh, absolutely. And I will be contacting the two of you. You know, I love my brother, Richard. You know, the way he connects us and the strength that he brings, it's just absolutely marvelous. So I really thank you very much for just this opportunity and being able to be here for a couple of minutes.
Thank you. So Adrian, Mike, how can the community help you? You know, are you recruiting? Hopefully some greater exposure through this Zoom call, this interview might help. But are there things that might benefit the growth of Foundry and the Mind Rock the Block initiative?
Yeah, so I saw Fred had asked a question of how many people in the Rock the Block program. We started with 7. We now have 4. And it's been a really interesting experience. I would just want to comment on that of like for the first probably month, if we kept the same guidelines for those 7 that we had for our rest of our employees, none of them would have made it through the first week, right? Like the exceptions we had to make and the willingness to accept something different to help them break the cycle was super important, I think, for the success, right? Like we had to really like think differently about the program. What was amazing of everything we did, we still ended up with 3 individuals who just refused to come to work. They just refused. Like we couldn't, no matter what, we just couldn't get them to engage, right? And the reality was they just weren't ready for this. The other 4, they're like, what do we have to do? Like we are here, we are engaged, and we want to figure this out. So it's been a really interesting learning program, and we're right now we're trying to figure out like how do we really create a business that can support even more people around this, right? And that's our goal. You know, in terms of what people can do to help, I would say when it comes to Bitcoin, it's really a journey, it's a self journey, and you have to do your own research. And so I would say get curious about this new technology. It's opened my eyes up to a lot of things that I was kind of blind to with how the world works, how money works, and why this is truly different and special, and why it leads us to a better world in the future. So I'd say get super curious about it, go down that self-education kind of journey. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We've got lots of resources if you want to dig in and learn more. I would say don't believe everything that the mass media is telling you about this space. One, they don't understand it themselves. They're pushing a narrative that somebody's paying them to push. There's a lot of super powerful people that don't want to see this stuff succeed. So don't buy into kind of all of that. This whole environmental issue, like we could have a whole nother podcast just talking about that topic. It is amazing what's happening there. So I would say, you know, be open to the fact that we are building a bleeding edge high-tech company here in Rochester, and it's a good thing. Yeah. And New York State should not be trying to run us out of the state, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense.
So I was going to piggyback a couple of things here. So I work hand in hand with my partner in crime, a man named Kyle Schneps, awesome part of our team. He leads our public policy efforts. Richard, we will be coming back if there's any more legislation being proposed that will limit the ability for our industry to grow within the state. So support us from that perspective. Also, we're going to go on a public education campaign with an effort called Crypto Connect. So we also going to be bringing that to you guys soon. And if you're interested in the industry, blockchain technology, we're going to have a number of different experts from across our organization come and give you insights from the industry. Obviously, do your own research, to Mike's point, right? Read these white papers and look certain things up if it sounds fishy to you before you get engaged or get involved. And don't get involved beyond your tolerance level, right? Like, get involved in a way that feels safe and secure for you. I can say that as somebody who just got in about a year ago. Also, what was I gonna say? Oh, as a workforce developer, I tell Mike this all the time, that there's not enough leaders in our community who are willing to practice workforce development in a specially curated way. If you can tell at Foundry, his willingness, which I'm so glad that he has it and brought me on board to help lead this effort, but this was ultimately initially a brainchild of yours. So thank you for trusting me with that. But encourage leaders in whatever your purview to also be willing to rethink how we can solve some of these systemic challenges in Rochester, right? There's no single silver bullet, but we have to try to do things differently if we're going to make headwinds as it relates to really starting to deal and get our hands around some of these big issues. And last but not least, somebody asked in the chat, where should they get non-BS recommendations? And I'll tell you, there's a company, a part of the DCG group called CoinDesk, which does a really good job of putting out newsletters and informations. And if you leave your email in there, you can subscribe to their newsletter and you can start getting more, balanced, objective information from people within the industry who can start to inform your thinking. So that's what you can do to help us out.
That's awesome. Thanks, because I felt obligated to get that question out there. You beat me to it. So we're coming up to 1 o'clock. We have 1 more minute. I want to thank you. I don't think anyone will question why we highlighted you today. You've just you define innovators and entrepreneurs in the new Rochester. So thank you very much. And thank you, Adrian, for attending the last Creative Collisions with 2 members of the cohort. They were delightful.
Absolutely.
And I also want to do a shout out to all the committee members. Obviously, Tom Myers, we're dependent upon him for producing so much, and Chris Cooley, Josh Krager, and Mike Thaney, George Mariri, Todd Fleming. If anyone has an interest in getting involved, this is an open architecture platform. Using old technology reference, this is a Linux. This is not us. We're very loose. And if anyone has an idea and the ability and interest to execute on that idea, we have 3,000 email addresses, 1,700 social media followers on Instagram and Facebook. And we're willing to put that to work. And we're willing to put that to work if you end up producing this Crypto Connect event. If we're here to help and support you. And thanks for all you've done for Rochester. Thanks for participating today. And hopefully we'll see many of you on January 5th at Rock Brewing in the heart of downtown, in the midst of this incredible transformation and revitalization of our city.
We'll be there.
Have a wonderful holiday, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Richard.